Hey, how's it going? Are we all having a very happy Halloween season? That's right, this channel isn't dead, it's undead. Come on, let's settle in, this might be a long one. I am never gonna get this blood out. Oh my god, what a mess. I don't know how people deal with midnight cravings. Hi. If you're watching this, it means that the video that I really wanted to get done in time for Halloween still isn't done yet, so you're getting this instead. I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they go by. Let's begin. This is the Shadow Vampire skin from Sonic Speed Simulator. He looks like Willy Wonka, I love him more than life itself, and I want to hit him with my car. I should begin by saying that as a Sonic fan, I tend to be relatively positive. I'm not one of those fans that really likes to critique the franchise on the internet unless, I don't know, they do something morally reprehensible. It isn't that there aren't things about the franchise I don't like, because there definitely are, but I just have more fun talking about the things I do like, or at least the things that I find interesting. Even when I am making fun of something in the Sonic fandom, I tend to do it all in good fun. The way you might, I don't know, immortalize the typo that a friend makes in a Discord server with an emoji, or the way you might make fun of the paint job on the walls of the saw trap room that you find yourself trapped in that you know you will never escape. I love the Sonic franchise, warts and all, even when it's all warts. So I want to be clear that even now, as I talk about the Shadow Vampire skin, and how it looks like a black raspberry can of LaCroix that wants to be a stage magician, I do it with love in my heart and absolute joy in my soul. It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, and I can't stop talking about it. So today, we're going to unpack Scene Core Monopoly Man, because there is a lot more going on with his design than you might think just at a glance. And that's saying a lot, because even at a glance, there is a lot going on here. There's always a conversation to be had about what the low point of the Sonic franchise was. Was it Sonic 06? Was it Sonic Forces? Was it the ecosystem on Sonic Twitter after Sonic Frontiers came out that honestly never really got any better? No. It was this skin. It was when Vampire Shadow showed up in the Roblox Sonic game and ruined my life. Let's face it, that kind of video would probably do pretty well, but I'm less interested in doing a video just critiquing the skin and more in figuring out how they ended up at this result and what source material it's actually referencing. I will say that as far as reception goes, it's pretty mixed. I've been sending this skin to a bunch of my friends and asking them what their first impressions are. Here's what they said. Ahem. Why does he look like that? He's already black and red. Why purple? What a choice. Number of choices, really. Is he supposed to be ugly? He isn't that bad as long as they don't want it to look good. And my favorite, woof. I will say, I don't think that either of these renders really does the design justice. Some of the best art of Vampire Shadow I've seen has been in fan art. When these artists draw him, I gotta admit, I like the vampire design way more. The amount of love and attention and talent that goes into these pieces mean that they stand as evidence to me that there is something compelling about the design choices made, even if the final design isn't personally my cup of tea. Like all official skins, I think this design really shines once fans get their grubby little paws all over it. I will say that even among fans who seem to like the design and make some really cool fan art of it, I typically see that they might add an element or take one away from the original design. It seems like for most people, there's something about the design that feels not cohesive, and looking at it, I can't say I blame them. The mixed feelings on the skin are interesting because I feel like a Shadow the Hedgehog vampire skin should be a fucking home run. He himself is a perfect base and a really successful character design. And by that, I don't mean that he's perfect. I mean, he is, but that's not what I mean. I just mean that as a visual foil for Sonic, everything about him works. Dark hues versus light. Where Sonic has these downturned, curved quills, Shadows are upturned and angled. Even like on their tummies, Sonic has this round, circular, friendly-looking patch, and Shadow has this triangular fluff. When you compare their shoes, we have Sonic's round boots, and then we have Shadow's mechanical, angled pieces of machinery. They really found new places to stick sharp angles compared to Sonic's roundness. from their eye shape to the stripes on his arms. Even if hypothetically you don't like Shadow's design because you have bad taste and you're wrong about everything, you need to admit that as a visual foil for Sonic, it works really well. You could tell that a lot of thought went into it, and as a result, they just look great next to each other. So default Shadow is great at what he does, but as the base for a vampire skin, he works on multiple levels. Even just visually, he's black and red, he has this mysterious, serious, moody, broody thing going on. Even his Build-A-Bear plush has this little frown. One second, let me grab it. Come here, you little tax right-off. See? He is incapable of ever smiling. Yes, I bought him a little vampire outfit, but come on, I had to. It's a vampire video, so really, this is a business expense. It's an investment. You're really losing money if you don't spend a $20 outfit on your $70 plush. Yes, this is financial advice. Shadow also has fangs in a lot of his art, or at least he used to. So I'm not one of those people who has a lot to say on the 3D models or renders for the Sonic franchise. No judgment if you are, it's just not my fight. I'm not qualified. I don't even know what a muzzle curve is, and at this point, I'm too afraid to ask. Tell me what it is in the comments down below. Wrong answers only, though. I want to stay ignorant. I think it makes me hotter.
I know how to handle the curves like an expert.
But as far as the models go, I think that the worst thing that Sonic Team ever did to me personally was get rid of Shadow's little fangs. He had them in the Shadow the Hedgehog 2005 renders, and I'm pretty certain he had them in the Sonic 06 renders, but if you look at games that are coming out recently, like Sonic Crossworlds, no fangs. They're gone. 0 out of 10, trash game. Throw that shit away. He still has them in IDW though, depending on the artist. So visually, again, we have all the pieces. He's black, he's red, he has fangs, but I do think there are more layers to this. I think what lends Shadow well to a vampire skin, even outside of his visual, is his backstory. He is part alien, part black arms. By some interpretations, he's almost completely black arms with only the physical appearance of a hedgehog. By that interpretation, Shadow is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He is the monster among us, among the normal hedgehogs. Also like vampires, he is an ageless, immortal being. Probably. This isn't too contested these days, but I do remember people arguing on DeviantArt comment threads about this when I was 12, so I will say that I don't know for sure if it's actually been explicitly stated anywhere that Shadow is an immortal being. It's definitely been hinted at pretty heavily though. It's very possible I'm wrong about that, by the way, and that it has been stated somewhere explicitly. Like I've said before on this channel, there's almost 35 years of Sonic the Hedgehog lore, so it's very difficult to be an expert in this series, but if you are, and I just missed something, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. But like I said, there are a lot of things implying that Shadow is ageless. In Gerald's journal, it says that Project Shadow was partially meant to create undying soldiers. We know that Black Doom is immortal and Shadow has his DNA. In one of Shadow's themes, Throw It All Away, we get the lyric, "You live in an endless life forever." And in the games, he survived being cryogenically frozen for 50 years and then crucified for another 200. And no, it is not lost to me that canonically, Shadow the Hedgehog was sealed behind a crucifix in an endless slumber, which is, and this is true, some vampire shit. But the question still stands as to whether or not Shadow survived being cryogenically frozen and then later on put in that prison device because he's immortal, or because of the nature of the machines he was sealed in. Like, we don't know whether or not if Sonic was frozen in the prison tube that Shadow was sealed in for 50 years, whether or not he would survive that process. And even if we are to believe that there is some kind of immortality going on, we don't know all of the specifics. Yes, he might be ageless, but does he automatically heal from injuries? It seems like he is able to take some damage due to the fact that in the games, he loses rings and can get a game over.
I'm the coolest.
But we don't know what can, in theory, kill him. Like, can he catch diseases? Is he only immune to the diseases that existed when he was created? It would make sense if he doesn't have a built-up immunity to newer viruses, like, hypothetically, the metal virus from IDW. So those are my caveats to the Shadow is immortal conversation. But, for the purpose of this video, yes, Shadow is immortal, And also, vampires are immortal. With that immortality comes an assumed loneliness that we often see explored in New Age vampire media. By nature of their undying monstrous status, the modern vampire is a sympathetic vampire, a lone wolf, doomed to watch history repeat itself again and again. And of course, doomed to watch wave after wave of loved ones fall away until, eventually, they stop trying to make new connections altogether. That sense of tragedy and self-isolation is, of course, not lost in Shadow's main arcs. If I sat here and listed all of the things about Shadow that lend themselves well to a vampire motif, from his heavy association with biblical themes to him having a goth best friend who's a bat, we'd be here all goddamn day. But needless to say, we have a perfect base for a vampire skin. And what do? You have him out here selling golden tickets to his chocolate factory. My beautiful boy. They Wonkaed my boy. So today I want to take a look at the choices they made and unpack why. I don't want to just call this thing ugly for 45 minutes, even though, and this is true, I would be within my right to, because it isn't just ugly. It's interesting. There are a lot of movie references and pieces of visual shorthand jam-packed into this skin. I would argue, too many. So what are the pieces of Vampire Shadow? First off, the cape. So far so good. Nothing wrong with a good high-color vampire cape. It's like a go-to vampire staple. I'm not the biggest fan of the purple, and we'll talk about the purple in a second, but for now, okay, a high-color cape is fine. Next, we have the top hat, and this is where things start to go south. There are a few people who told me when I showed them this skin that the top hat was a surprising choice because it didn't really scream vampire to them. But I will say Bela Lugosi's Dracula did wear a top hat, as did Gary Oldman's Dracula in 1992. But on top of that, the top hat serves as good shorthand for the Victorian Edwardian era in general. The late Victorian era, of course, being when Bram Stoker's Dracula was written. I won't say I like the top hat personally, but I do appreciate it in that in some ways it distinguishes this vampire design from more modern iterations and interpretations of the vampire, setting it squarely in the Count Dracula era. Shadow is a Dracula. He isn't a True Blood, he isn't a Twilight, he isn't a Vlad the Impaler, he is a Dracula. And the top hat helps solidify that. And that's important because I think it is fitting to give Shadow a more classic vampire designation because he is, again, an ageless being stuck in time. And I will say that Shadow has been associated with a Victorian aesthetic before. I'm thinking of his trophy room in Shadow Generations. It has these Victorian-style upholstered chairs, it has these elaborate picture frames. It's also mostly lit by candles. I don't know, it feels intentional, it feels gothic, it feels very Dracula. I kind of love it. Remember, Shadow is asynchronistic. He was frozen in time 50 years ago and has only just woken up. It's why, in Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, his arc revolves around him not knowing how to use a printer. Grandpa is struggling. The top hat, I think even more so than the cape, evokes this bygone era. It's a successful design choice in that area, and it adds something to the silhouette that I think is interesting. It's not my favorite, but I can see why they went with that. As for why it's purple, Vampire Shadow actually gets both his top hat and his color scheme from the Halloween Shadow render. The Sonic Speed Simulator wiki claims that it's specifically this 2018 render by Nibrock Sarkaria. While Nibrock does currently work on GameFam Studios, the team behind Sonic Speed Simulator, I don't know if he had any influence on the final Shadow vampire design. The Nibrock render is the best art I have available of the Halloween Shadow skin, which is why I use it in this video and call it the Nibrock render throughout this video. However, despite the claims of the wiki, Nibrock didn't create this design. The design originated on Sonic Runners as Halloween Shadow, before it was eventually evolved into the vampire Shadow we see today, from Halloween events in Sonic Dash, Sonic Forces Speed Battle, and of course, Sonic Speed Simulator, with a few variations in the middle. Halloween Shadow isn't stated directly to be a vampire, but also, come on, look at him. he's a vampire. I also suspect that the Halloween shadow design is based off of this Sonic design from a piece of 2009 Sonic Channel Halloween art. And we'll talk about this, but for now, let's just put a pin in it. Shout out to my friend Sam for helping me with the timeline here. This is why we gotta maintain our wikis and fact check them, guys. I was so confused. I guess this is the fake fan tax I must pay. This is what I get for not playing Sonic Dash in 2015 and instead going to college like a fool. So, for the sake of this video, just know that when I refer to the Nibrock render, I mean the original Halloween shadow design, and when I say vampire shadow, I mean non-binary flag tuxedo mask over here. As far as the color goes, I'll begin by saying that in theory, I'm okay with the purple. It's Halloween-y. I don't think we have a lot of purple skins in general, and, you know, purple isn't not a vampire color. There are other purple-themed vampires. We have Count Von Count from Sesame Street. We probably have some others. I like this render, and I definitely consider it a more successful aesthetic design than what we end up with in Sonic Speed Simulator. But it is also just Shadow in a cape and a top hat. Like, it didn't change anything else about him. He doesn't even have different shoes. And that's okay. Later on in this video, we'll actually talk about another version of the Shadow Vampire that does something similar. But for now, I want to talk about what was changed between this render and what we end up with. Let's begin with the color of the hat. You'll notice that in the Nibrock render, it's black, and obviously in the end we end up with this weird purple. I think it's notable that the purple that we end up with isn't even the same purple that lines the cape, or the original purple of the cape in the Nibrock render. Now, I'm not that opposed to changing it from black, because if it's not black, then it can stand out a bit more against Shadow's quills. But I do notice that they end up going with this, like, indigo, bluish, cool tone purple, rather than the more violet purple that they began with. They also went with a completely different purple, this like electric purple, this bright magenta-ish purple for the lining of the cape. And that shade of purple and the purple in the hat kind of clash a little, if you ask me. Now, I am not proposing that they go with the same electric, bright Kool-Aid purple for the hat. I think that would be ugly. In fact, I know that would be ugly because they tried it in a different version of the render and then they changed it to this navy blue purple. The color they end up going with is this deep bluish indigo. And I can't help but wonder if the reason why they did that is because Sonic's Werehog skin is a very similar shade. I imagine both of these designs will be put on Halloween promotional material together. Maybe they wanted them to complement one another. I mean, God knows the fandom loves drawing the two designs next to each other, if that means anything. I will say that is just me guessing, I don't really know, but it would make sense from a marketing standpoint to want to have the two skins that you would dish out during Halloween to, you know, be able to look nice on a social graphic next to one another. Next, we have the cravat, or maybe it's a jabot. The Red Lobster bib. But let me tell you the thing about the jabot that makes me the most angry. You'll notice that in some pieces of art, they just kind of have it over his chest fur, over his chest fluff. But in this render, which is, I want to make sure I emphasize, this is an official render, they actually replace his chest fluff. Like, it's not like it's just covering the chest fur isn't there, and instead they have this jabot. I hate that. Jail. Whoever thought of that, lock them up. Abolish prison, except for whoever got rid of his chest hair. It's not even just that they covered it up, it's that they gave it an opposite shape, and so it clashes with the lines that you would follow. The upside-down triangle of the chest fluff, on the other hand, follows the shape of Shadow's torso. If anything, it emphasizes the angles that we were talking about earlier. God, maybe I am one of those render people. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Yeah, I think I get it now. I mean, I'm personally not gonna write up a Google Doc and then send that to Sonic Team about it, but I do think that the chest fluff is important to Shadow's design. Next, we have the shoes. So I think these golden bars here are supposed to be buckles. And when I think of buckles on a shoe of this shape and silhouette, I think of Puritan era shoes, like pilgrim shoes. I did some research, and I'm not a clothing historian, so I could be wrong, but from what I can tell, shoes with this shape and a buckle on them are much more evocative of the Rococo era, the Baroque era in fashion. Like, they even have the same heel going on. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, which is when Dracula takes place, you were more likely to see men's shoes with laces, or perhaps buttons up the side. And that's interesting, because while the 1800s to me evokes the idea of the vampire, the 1600s, at least in a lot of horror, is tied intrinsically to the era of the witch hunt. So it's the aesthetic of witch hunters, monster hunters. And then I looked closer at Shadow's shoes. When I look at the shape of the buckle, you know what it reminds me of? A wooden stake. You know, like the way you kill a vampire? A wooden stake through the heart? Now, this could all be me overthinking, as per usual. But if this is an intentional design choice, that's really interesting. Because remember, part of what lends Shadow well to the vampire motif is that he is part Black Arms. But you need to remember, Shadow also killed all the Black Arms. He's the one who eradicated them. So if we're extending this metaphor to vampirism, that would make him a vampire hunter. Through this lens, he is not Dracula, he is Alucard. He is not Lestat, he's Blade. And that's pretty fucking cool. Next up, we have the gloves and the cufflinks. I'm gonna say, I actually don't have much bad to say about these. It gives them another place to add more accents, and they did. They added these gold buttons. And they're also able to make them the same indigo navy blue to match the hat, so it makes the hat feel less out of place. I do think they look a little bit odd floating there attached to the glove instead of at the end of where a sleeve might be, but, you know, it's the Roblox Sonic game. I don't think I should be here looking for logic. I'm here for vibes. And aside from my thoughts on the indigo that I have for, you know, every part of this outfit, I don't really have any notes here. Finally, we have the quills and this fuck-ass stripe. The lightning zigzag skunk stripe in his spines is the most interesting part of this design to me. Maybe it's just supposed to look like lightning because Sonic and Shadow are fast and lightning is also fast. I don't know. Lightning and sparking is the visual shorthand that we get for a lot of Shadow's powers and for the Chaos Emeralds and Chaos Energy in general. There are vampires who occasionally will have a white streak, but that's typically just meant to denote, you know, salt and peppering in their hair. It's not this very specific zigzag. Like when you see a white streak in a lot of cartoon vampire designs, it's not meant to evoke anything except how much of a dilf that specific vampire is. There is one vampire I found with a zigzag skunk stripe, and it's specifically this version of Dracula from the 1988 animated comedy made-for-television film Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School. And hey, this version of Dracula and his daughter are also purple, adding to the list of purple vampires we have. So maybe this shadow skin is a sick Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School 1988 reference. We've done it, guys! We solved the case! However, I think that this Dracula is probably pulling from our most likely resource for the reference, the Bride of Frankenstein. I think it works. I mean, Dracula and the Bride of Frankenstein are both classic horror movie staples. They're having fun with it. They're drawing from two different places to evoke this idea. But this adds more layers to it, because the more you think of all of the elements of Shadow's backstory that lend themselves well to a vampire motif, the more you realize that a lot of those same elements lend themselves well to a Frankenstein's monster motif. We talked a lot about Shadow being an ageless, immortal being with impossible strength who can never truly belong among his fellow hedgehog kind. And, of course, the existential angst that goes hand in hand with that. But do you know who else that applies to, perhaps even more so? Frankenstein's monster, Who is Gerald Robotnik if not a modern Prometheus, a new age Dr. Frankenstein, toiling away in his lab with forces not meant to be tampered with by human hands, creating life itself with deadly consequences for those in his own family? Shadow was built molecule by molecule in a lab by bald government-endorsed Dr. Frankenfurter over here, and now he's just doomed to walk this bitch of an earth. Like Mary Shelley's monster, even when Shadow tries to do good, he is often written into stories where he's mistrusted and seen as the other. It's important to note that Frankenstein in the novel isn't the brainless, shambling creature that we see in the old films. He's remarkably intelligent and remarkably beautiful, and he teaches himself how to speak and how to read. Specifically, to read Paradise Lost, the Milton epic about Lucifer. Yet again, we have arrived at the devil from the Bible, I should say, as long as we're talking about parallels between Frankenstein's monster and Shadow. The idea of Shadow reading Paradise Lost just really tickles me.
Never can true reconcilment grow where wounds of deadly hate have pierced so deep. It's just like my life. In a way.
This is your next new storybook game. Sonic and the Black Knight? No, Shadow and the Fall of Lucifer. You can have that one for free, Sega. I will say that I do think Shadow lends himself more to a vampire aesthetic than a Frankenstein one. Even with all the Frankenstein similarities, there is still a lot lending itself to a vampire motif. Like the Black Arms are seen as parasitic monsters that feed off of humanity. That has vampire written all over it. I say this to mean that I think if they were to make a Frankenstein skin instead of a vampire skin for Shadow, there would be rioting in the streets. It would be like making a Hello Kitty collab and not making Shadow Kuromi. It would make no sense. But of course, there are a lot of parallels between Frankenstein and Shadow. But remember, the skunk stripe isn't a Frankenstein feature, it's a Bride of Frankenstein feature. I want to start with the original novel. In the book, the bride was partially created by Victor Frankenstein after the monster confronted him, begging him for a bride. He was like, "You made me, and if I gotta be here forever, god damn it, I am not going to be a virgin. Go back to your lab, take down the Spirit Halloween banner, this is a Build-A-Bitch now." The deal was that if he got a girlfriend, the monster would just fuck off into the woods and never come back. He wouldn't terrorize Victor anymore, he wouldn't kill any more townspeople, so Victor started working on the bride, he robbed a bunch of graves. It was like the hottest pile of sewn-up body parts you've ever seen. But then he's like, oh no. What if I did too good of a job? What if they get busy and make a bunch of fucked up Frankenstein kids? I'm not ready to be a grandpa. And so he tears the body apart with his bare hands while the monster is watching through the window. And you might be thinking, well, why didn't he just take out its womb or make sure its ovaries didn't work or some other means of making the monster's bride infertile? And to that I would say that this is a great time to remind you that Frankenstein wasn't a real doctor. He was just some guy with a taxidermy hobby. It's always the motherfuckers who don't finish school who want to tamper with mysterious forces, huh? So in the novel, the bride was killed for her ability to create life with her body. She was the victim of an act of brutality steeped in feminine trauma, literally torn apart for her body's wicked potential. Now, Takashi Iizuka won't reply to my emails, so I can't be sure, but outside of about 90% of the fanfic I've been reading this month, Shadow doesn't have the ability to create life, or at least I don't think he does. Gerald didn't go into that in the journal pages that we have. But I don't think it's an accident that they chose a Shadow skin to have this reference to one of the most notable female monsters in pop culture, especially when Shadow is a character who's a bit more associated with the feminine than other male characters in the Sonic franchise. I know the Twitter takeovers aren't canon, but Shadow is the character who they joke about having a 20-step skincare routine and liking pop music and going shopping with Amy and ironing his linens. And I know that part of them doing that is meant to be a comedic juxtaposition of a serious male character being into what a mainstream audience might perceive as frivolous feminine interests, and we can unpack that and criticize it, but I kind of love it. And I also want to say that I think part of this is that the social team is keying into something that a lot of Sonic fans have recognized for a long time. Yeah, we'll do the feminist critique in another video, okay? I'm not the fun police. Happy Halloween. I should also say, to the social team's credit, the more current takeovers are pretty good about not having this undertone. They take care to avoid having other characters mock Shadow for his interests, and even seem to celebrate them at times. But I do sometimes wonder if the Sonic fandom engages with the takeovers on that level. But that's a whole other conversation. Even in the games and official materials, Shadow is constantly, brushing back his quills and sitting with his legs crossed, and he has a relatively amicable relationship to the women in the series. His best friend is Rouge the Bat, an incredibly feminine and assumedly sex-positive character. He was raised alongside Maria Robotnik, a teenage girl, and they were incredibly close. And even in Sonic Cross Worlds, his interactions with the other female characters are a lot more positive.
Gotcha, Shadow!
Well struck, Amy.
He also shuts down any of Rouge's attempts to make herself seem less formidable than she is. I don't make the rules. Shadow is a girl's girl. Let me tell you, at any given moment, if you need a tampon, he's the one most likely to have one hidden away in his quills. You'd have way better luck asking him than Sonic. Sonic doesn't carry tampons around, but that's not because he's not an ally. It's because he thinks everyone should free bleed. He's just like the wind, for real, for real. All this said, however, the Bride of Frankenstein in the novel doesn't have the skunk stripe. Or well, maybe she does. Mary Shelley didn't really go into it. Maybe we should assume that the author meant for us to visualize her with cunty little highlights. But regardless, the first time we really see the skunk stripe is in the 1935 Universal Pictures movie, The Bride of Frankenstein. Strap in, we're gonna talk about this for a hot minute. So in this film, Frankenstein's old college professor, Dr. Pretorius, visits him after Frankenstein and the monster both barely survive the events of the last film. Dr. Pretorius attempts to tempt him with the idea of making a new monster, but this time with titties, eyelashes, and a pink bow in its hair. He proposes they make a woman, with the intent of it being a bride for the monster to reproduce with.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Which, let me tell you, it would have saved us a lot of trouble if he just did that the last time, don't you think? Meanwhile, the monster is running around just kind of accidentally murdering people. Like, some of these deaths definitely seem intentional, but in some cases, he's just walking around, looking ugly, and then some poor girl comes across him and screams, and then he just wildly starts windmilling and she falls over dead. It's all very tragic. Eventually, he comes across a blind hermit living in a cabin in the woods. He teaches the monster how to say all the important staple words: wine, bread, friend. He also teaches the monster about smoking. He fucking loves smoking. And that's actually how Dr. Pretorius is able to tempt him in. Like, the monster smells the cigarette smoke and he's like, oh my god, smoking. That's one of 8 words I know. I'm such a fan. And that's how Dr. Pretorius is able to bring him in to help with his evil plans. The monster kidnaps Frankenstein's wife, and so Frankenstein is forced to help Dr. Pretorius create the bride. Eventually, we get to the main attraction of the movie in like the final 7 minutes of the film, when they bring the bride to life. And oh my god, Elsa Lanchester is gorgeous, and also wildly out of the monsters league. And this is obvious even to her, and she was born 2 minutes ago. You see, that's the problem with making a self-actualized human being. She takes one look at his crusty ass and she decides she wants nothing to do with him. She rejects him. She rejects romance. Already, we see some interesting parallels between the bride and Shadow. Both Shadow and the bride are creatures made by a mad scientist who is being corrupted by another, more evil force.
Next one is the very devil. There's a certain resemblance to me, don't you think?
With both Gerald and Frankenstein being coerced with the health of a loved one hanging in the balance. Both Shadow and the Bride are presented as improvements of an earlier prototype, with Shadow's black arm's DNA differentiating him from the Bio-Lizard, and the Bride being a more beautiful creature than the original monster, crafted partially with Dr. Pretorius's technology. Shadow and the Bride both reject the purposes placed on them by their respective corrupt fathers. Dr. Pretorius wanted the Bride to be a broodmare, a means of creating the Frankenstein race, and Shadow was intended by Black Doom to help the Black Arms destroy humanity, and both of them are repulsed by their respective grand designs. And, of course, both Shadow and the Bride have two dads. Love wins. The movie is camp, the movie is fun, but on top of all this, it lends itself to some very interesting readings. Throughout the movie, the monster doesn't seem to necessarily even crave a female partner or a love interest. He seems to just want companionship. As Gary Morris said in the Bright Lights Film Journal, the monster's sexuality is unsettled, bisexual, his attentions captured equally by the male hermit and his possible female bride. The monster refers to both the bride and the hermit as friend. It's actually the campy, vampy, vice-ridden, and very obviously homosexual Dr. Pretorius.
He's a very queer-looking old gentleman, sir.
Who wants to create a new race of Frankensteins. And by the time the monster comes around to that concept, when he reaches for the woman, she is repulsed by him. And she gets killed for it. At the end of the movie, Frankenstein's monster tears down the castle over him and the bride. She rejects heterosexuality and gets punished for it by the narrative. So, this is as good a time as any to mention that the film's director, James Whale, was openly gay. He was fully out and proud. Or well, maybe not proud, it was 1935. But anyone who knew him personally knew that he was gay and living with his partner, David Lewis. Colin Clive and Ernest Thesiger, who are also in the movie and played Dr. Frankenstein and Dr. Pretorius, were also thought to be queer. The bride, like I mentioned, is played by Elsa Lanchester, and she was married to Charles Laughton in what is commonly believed to have been a lavender marriage. She was his beard. On top of the fact that Charles Laughton was gay, rumors of Elsa Lanchester's asexuality have persisted through the years. And this is the team behind The Bride of Frankenstein, which I think might be the crown jewel of 1930s Hays Code era queer coding in media. Now, what does all of this have to do with Shadow the Hedgehog? I've mentioned this before, particularly in my last video, but Shadow's backstory lends itself very well for coding for any group of people that has historically been vilified by those in power. In my last video about Shadow the Hedgehog, I talked about post-9/11 terrorist Middle Eastern coding, and nowadays, a lot of Latino coding is actually employed in a lot of Shadow's depictions. That's something I intend to dive into in a future video. It's coming. I promise it's coming eventually. But most pertinent to this section of this video, I should say that Shadow has always lent himself to queer readings. This is part of why he works well with both Frankenstein and vampire themes. The strange one, the outsider, the monster. These were all evoked as shorthand in Hays Code era monster films and beyond to monster films of this day. And these also persist in films with queer stories. And of course, these are also themes that Shadow himself embodies. There is a Venn diagram here with some serious overlap. Now, I am not saying that Shadow is canonically queer, and you don't need to believe that he is. If you're one of those people who believe that this is a 100% heterosexual man, sure. But whether he's queer or not, there is a reason why queer fans of Shadow see themselves in his narrative. I'm just gonna say it. You don't get 10,000 fics on Archive of Our Own on Delusion alone. Delusion typically only has the fuel in it for a couple hundred, a couple thousand fics at most. These themes are just the type of thing that a lot of queer people tend to relate to. And that is the context under which I find the Bride of Frankenstein reference and the accompanying themes very interesting. Designer intent aside, I do think it's notable that of all of the classic horror movies to possibly allude to in a shadow vampire skin, the zigzag skunk stripe in particular is such an obvious reference to one of cinema's most notable female monsters with one of the gayest Hays Code era production rosters I've ever heard of. Again, this is a vampire skin, and they went out of their way to include this reference in here even though it is absent from the render it is said to be based off of. But I will say, for those of you who hate this reading, even if we were to completely separate the skunk stripe from the Bride of Frankenstein, there is still a lot of interesting dense meaning to be found. In fiction, and often in animation, hair turning white or getting a white stripe is associated with trauma, both physical and psychological. Characters are exposed to something horrifying and then are forever changed. We actually see this exact trope in Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks comedy parody, where Elizabeth, the bride of the scientist Frankenstein, sees the monster and then gets these stripes. But of course, the trope shows up all over the place. Conventionally speaking, white hair is, physically, of course, a sign of aging. And on an ageless character like, say, a vampire, there is a level of irony here. But metaphorically, and perhaps going hand in hand with aging, it symbolizes a closeness to death, and the trauma that accompanies that. Shadow has always been close to death, both as a killing machine created for the military, and also in his personal loss. We've seen him grapple with symptoms of PTSD, so thematically, a white stripe feels fitting. Or maybe the costume designers just fucking like it. Maybe they just think it looks like lightning, and lightning is fast, and shadow is fast. Maybe they just really like Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School, I don't know. I know I'm looking a lot into Barney the steampunk mall goth over here, and I know that sometimes the curtains are just blue. I know, I swear, I know. And I guess if I wanted to, I could just sit here like, well, the design is bad, go home, and you could all leave, and that'd be fine. I already got the AdSense money out of you. That fraction of a penny is mine. So I don't need you anymore if you don't want to listen to me overthink a bad Halloween skin, but there's just so much more here if you just dig a little deeper. And this design makes me want to dig deep. And it is ugly. God help us all. It is so ugly. But it isn't thoughtless. They have a lot of interesting ideas here. The problem isn't a lack of effort. The problem is that he looks like a grape onceler. And it's especially frustrating because there are aesthetically better official pieces featuring Shadow as a vampire. Let's talk about the Sonic Channel Shadow vampire costume. This is a solid vampire Shadow. It's very fun, I love it. He's taking his child trick-or-treating, what's not to love? He does only really have a couple things going on here. They went with a keep it simple, stupid approach. They just threw on a cape, and they threw this spooky bandage around his arm, like he's on Sonic Boom. And there, you have a perfectly adequate Shadow vampire skin that isn't at all ugly, that I very often, honestly, forget exists. I mean, it's fine. It's a great look. He looks like Shadow. He looks like a vampire. They met the brief. It is a vampire Shadow. But I can't help but feel like it's a bit less inspired than it should be. Partially because, you might notice, it's just the same official Sonic art from before. It's literally just the 2009 Sonic Channel Halloween art. They took that same cape, made it slightly darker, and then they called it a day. Frankly, after looking at the Sonic Speed Simulator skin for so long, this looks a little bit boring, doesn't it? I also think that a lot of the legwork is being done by Shadow's design here. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that when another character like Sonic is wearing this exact costume, Sonic doesn't look like a Dracula. He looks like he's wearing a Dracula costume. He looks like he just ran through a Spirit Halloween on the way over. And hey, maybe you do think this looks like a vampire. Maybe this works for you, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that they took on so many more risks with the Sonic Speed Simulator skin, and I kind of respect that. Think about how easy it is to make Shadow look like a vampire. I mean, you don't even gotta imagine it, it's right here. Just throw a cape on the guy. He's already black and red, like my friend said. Why bother doing all this? I'm coming to the conclusion that even if all of my takeaways here are just stretching and overanalysis, I love that there's something here for me to overanalyze. A good design makes me think, and this design doesn't. There isn't anything here for me to overthink. But I have so many takeaways of the official vampire skin. Are some of those takeaways that he looks like the love child of Scrooge McDuck and Grimace? Yes, but at least I'm looking at it. This skin is a bit of a thinker, but if you do the thinking, it kind of pays off. There are probably going to be people going, call me old-fashioned, but perhaps a design should just look good. And those people are correct, but I still appreciate there being layers. So for the rest of this video, I want to do a little queer eye for the dead guy. I want to see how I would go about doing this. I am designing a vampire shadow, but I want to take this challenge head on. I want to attempt to make a skin that isn't ugly, but that also does all the things that I find interesting about the Sonic Speed Simulator skin. What does this mean? Well, I want it to be recognizably a vampire skin. I would like it to evoke the Victorian era. I'd like it to have some classic horror movie references. I'd like it to somehow incorporate the purple color scheme so we can honor the render that inspired it. And it needs to look nice. As a bonus challenge, it would be cool if it could evoke some kind of Monster Hunter, Vampire Hunter aesthetic. I know that was probably a reach, but the idea is just really cool to me. And I want to see if I could also evoke Frankenstein. Just, because I really like that this evokes Frankenstein. Now, granted, I should say, I am not a character designer, and I do not do character art. I draw backgrounds and landscapes, but this is very much outside of my wheelhouse. This is gonna be very much me stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing something I've never done before. For the rest of this video, we're just having fun. This overanalysis is what I do. Character design, not so much. So let's begin with what is probably the most go-to pop culture reference for a vampire, Bela Lugosi's Dracula. I know I want to evoke this era and this vibe without just putting Shadow in a typical Dracula costume, but I do know that I want to have a cape here. The cape is just so perfect for the silhouette. Like, all of these designs have the cape. I think I also want my Shadow to have the cape. I made this little shadow paper doll that I can try different outfits on, and if you're wondering why he's T-posing, it's to show you that he loves you this much. Also, it's really obvious on this one, but if you're wondering why all of my printouts look like I'm almost out of ink, it's because ink is expensive. You can support me on patreon.com/HanaHyperFixates. Thank you very much. There, look at that. So here's the cape. Let me just pop this behind Shadow. There, he's wearing a cape. The first thing that actually came to my mind when I was thinking about this era was actually like a white flowy peasant top. I'm thinking of Lestat. I'm thinking of the romantic concept of the 1800s vampire. I personally love a vampire in a slutty little peasant top. Frankly, there's a version of this skin where you just stick Shadow in a peasant top, throw in some fangs, and there you have it. Like a Fabio cover. I feel like putting a Fabio cover on here might age me a bit, but that's okay. I'm embracing my age. Sometimes people on YouTube act like being above 25 is old and ancient and decrepit. We have 26-year-old white men on here being like, yeah, well, I know I'm unk. And I'm like, no, Andrew, you're not unk. For more reasons than one. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Sega would never go for something like this, and you're right. Let me fix it. Boom. You can't forget the chest hair, I'm telling you, it's imperative to his design. I didn't notice until after I made this graphic that up here it says, experience unforgettable ecstasy in his arms. Yes, sir, don't mind if I do. This is him. This is the ultimate life form. Let me get the paper doll up here so you can see the final vision. By the way, if any of you guys are looking at how low cut this top is and you have a problem, I should remind you that right now, there are people ready to march into streets because they reduced Rouge de Batz's cup size to a B cup. And for a good reason. Give my girl back her girls. But I mention this to say that if you are part of the movement to, return the tits back to their rightful owner, so to speak, then you don't get to pick and choose. You're either sex positive or you're not. I better not see any big titty Rouge lovers in my comments telling me to give Shadow the Hedgehog a sweater. Lacing up my shirt all the way? I don't have time for this. Honestly, this still isn't as slutty as the cheetah print Gigolo shirt he matches with Sonic. That one is... man, that one might be too much for me. God, we get it, Shadow. Stop stuffing it down our throats, am I right? So, as far as inspiration to pull from, there's also the 1800s vest or waistcoat. These would often also be fancifully embroidered. It gives us more bandwidth for decorating, etc. So this adds to the clothing items we have to pull from. We have a peasant top, we have a vest, we have a cape. We can put it all together and make this outfit. And I do think that this looks very good, but you might not have realized it, but this is just default vampire. We have accidentally arrived at default vampire. If you just Google vampire costume, you get this again and again and again. White shirt, vest, high collar cape. Hell, it's what the Build-A-Bear Shadow is wearing. White shirt, vest, cape. And there's nothing wrong with the combo. The top 40 hits are in the top 40 for a reason. But I think I want to try to pull some deep cuts, maybe get some B-sides in there. We already have the cape doing a lot of the heavy lifting, so we can have some fun with it. So I started looking at classic horror movie monsters again, and it doesn't get any more classic vampire than Nosferatu. He has this pretty iconic trench coat, and if we were to give Shadow a trench coat, it wouldn't be the first time it's been done. I'm pretty certain I've seen Sonic Channel art with Shadow wearing a trench coat. Trench coats and vampires actually have a few notable contemporary examples as well. The first to come to mind is one I actually already mentioned. Blade. Blade, a half vampire hunter, has this really high collar trench coat with like a wide billowing bottom. And I think this silhouette is actually meant to evoke the silhouette we get with the cape. And having an homage to Blade would also bring in those possibly a reach but still pretty cool vampire hunter, monster hunter, vampire vibes. Leather trench coats on vampires also make me think of Underworld. For those of you who are uncultured and don't know about Underworld, it's this early 2000s series about vampires fighting werewolves, and it stars Kate Beckinsale as Celine, who I think I might still be in love with. She's a werewolf hunter, and listen, this movie is trash, but it's my trash. I think it was universally critically panned, and I love it. And you know what else? I feel like Underworld and Shadow the Hedgehog 2005 are very much the same genre. They both have a similar pathos in their creation as these campy monster versus monster narratives. Celine and Shadow even have similar personalities, cold and detached, moody, they both ride motorcycles. The revelation that when I was 12, I did very much, in fact, have a type. The idea of a Celine vampire shadow skin. Remember, she hunts werewolves, and Sonic is a werehog. Listen, the concept writes itself. Do I gotta do everything myself here? There, I put a little trench coat on him, so now we could just visualize it. I really do love the idea of putting him in a trench coat, but I do gotta say, the trench coat does take us a little bit further away from that Victorian era aesthetic I was going for. And I thought about abandoning this path altogether, but then I came across the Victorian embroidered tailcoat. The tailcoat typically featured a high-low asymmetrical design where it cut off at the waist and then the bottom flared out at the back. They could be simple, but they could also be pretty heavily embellished, going by what I found. They also varied from having one row of buttons to sometimes having 2 rows of buttons. And if we wanted to go with that double row of buttons, we could evoke the same kind of shape as the Nosferatu trench coat. An embroidered tailcoat also gives us room for pops of colors and accents and different places to put some more embellishments. We could put red designs over black and really pull it all together, so he's not just wearing this solid black outfit. And because it has long sleeves, we're able to add some kind of cufflink. We now have room for a cuff that isn't just hanging by a glove. It's actually at the end of some sleeves. And where before they had these gold cufflinks, we could actually make ours maybe have a gem. Perhaps a purple gem. So now we're able to actually pull in that purple color palette. Also, when I think about it, I realize we can do the same thing for the cape. At the clasp, we could probably have some kind of brooch or gem, and it could also be purple. Now, I admit, something I was really torn on was, do we have the vest underneath or do we have a peasant top? I ended up going with the waistcoat in my final concept, but I promise, underneath the waistcoat is a peasant top. And visible above all that is the chest fur. I was looking into different kinds of shoe shapes, and I did come across a few. I learned that the silhouette of the Shadow Skin's shoes isn't necessarily not Victorian. Even though the buckle is a bit more Rococo Baroque era, the silhouette, like this shape where it kind of has this flap at the top, does match some references that I found from the 1800s. So I'm actually okay with keeping that shape. And I thought about using like a line of derby buttons or maybe some laces, but I just also like the buckle. I think the buckle works. So I ended up just putting some buckles on them, but making them black and red to match the rest of the black and red outfit we have going on. Lastly, I threw in some dark gloves just because I like how dark gloves look. Like the Sheriff Sonic Outlaw Shadow featured some dark gloves on that Shadow Skin, and I really liked that aesthetic, so I just brought it in here. So there you have it. These are all the pieces of my vampire shadow. But there was one more thing I wanted to do. I added some Bride of Frankenstein stripes. I changed the positioning so that they're a bit more far back and they don't start next to his eyeballs like, eyeliner or something. Even though the Bride of Frankenstein hair does start right at her temples, I think because of Shadow's head shape, moving them back actually helps convey that a bit better. I also made them more of a gray. I played around with making them red, I did red zigzags in my own hair because I was able to, but I wasn't able to really make the zigzags work with his quills. I don't know, maybe it just speaks to my lack of talent as an artist, but I do think that the grayish stripes below the red works fine. But there! It's done! The same way I think that the original shadow design works better in fan art than it does in its actual render, I figured if I want this skin to do well, I gotta get a fan artist to draw it. So, here he is. I need the skin to have a fighting chance. I need it in ideal circumstances, and a talented fan artist like Shady drawing it is as ideal as it gets. And I'm asking myself, with this design, did I succeed at making a shadow vampire skin? And I gotta say, I don't know if I did. I did get some lovely compliments from friends telling me that they liked my design, but they are also my friends, which means I can't trust those bitches. I'm looking at this and I'm realizing this isn't the best vampire shadow. Maybe I just needed more time to cook. Remember, I have jobs outside of YouTube and I didn't give myself a lot of time to work on this. I was kind of rushing this video to get it out in time for Halloween. Though maybe that makes it a bit more authentic. Until recently, Sega didn't really give their devs enough time to cook on these concepts. So perhaps pushing out this design in a couple of weeks is the real Sonic character designer experience. But I do like this design. Enough so that if, hypothetically, I was working for Sonic Team and I made this skin, and then in 3 to 4 years some fuck-ass YouTuber made a video saying that it was so ugly it made them want to die, I would probably feel pretty bad. I worked so hard on him. I know he's always T-posing, but I did my best. Maybe I should have just given him the peasant top vest and cape combo. At least then it would be instantly recognizable. It's just so basic, you know? If anything, this whole project has taught me that every fan on Twitter who thinks they could do better than the developers or the writers or the designers probably thinks that they can, but whatever they come up with will probably end up being more conventional or more polarizing than the thing they're trying to fix, or possibly both. I've come a long way on the Sonic Speed Simulator vampire skin. I still don't think it's necessarily a successful design, but I don't know. I love it in a way that I didn't before I started this whole thing. It's so goofy and a little campy. It's leaning in, you know? I get a smile on my face when I look at it. That's how I learned to stop worrying and love the Wonka. Maybe the real golden ticket was the blood we sucked along the way. Happy Halloween. He looks like a period drama Chris Angel, a cashier at a Minnesota Vikings merch stand trying a new look. Houdini's midlife crisis. He's cosplaying an emo Bill Sona. It's like they knew it was bad. They made the idol skin a couple years later, and it's a better vampire skin than this. He looks like if Lord Licorice from the 2013 version of Candyland discovered grape flavor. He looks like a bootleg Dark Magician Yu-Gi-Oh card. Theater Kid Joker over here. Abraham Lincoln goes to the theater, but instead of the play, it's an MCR concert. Cold Steel the Hedgehog's going through his trad goth phase. He looks like he's Disney bounding as Dr. Facilier, and he barely makes it into the park. Prune Juice at the disco. What a shame the poor groom's bride is Count Cannoli from Wario. I ate a lot of red food coloring at the beginning of this video. That's like fine, right? It's like good for you. It's probably good for you.